What's up, everyone out there in YouTube world, Facebook world, social media world, the world, wherever you are today watching this video. This is another episode of Musings with MGL. I am your host, as always, MGL. Today, I'm going to do a quick little video about something that happens to us quite a bit down here in Florida. But before we do, got to get it out of the way. Please like, share, subscribe to the channel. I'm approaching 1,000 subscribers. It'd be pretty cool to get that by the end of the year. I'm inching ever closer. So if you like my content, please subscribe, share, comment, etc. So today's topic is going to be when can I carry my guns in a hurricane? So down here in Florida, we do have a hurricane that's approaching now. I think it's Ian or whatever the hell his name is. Obviously, I've lived in Florida my whole life, and anybody who's lived down here knows that we always get hurricanes every summer, despite what the climate people will tell you. It's been happening ever since I was a kid and ever since the state has existed. So nothing new here for us in Florida. But what is new is a law that was passed, about 5 or 6 years ago. I think it was around 2016, changing the carrying concealed firearm laws as it relates to hurricanes. So prior to this new law coming, hurricanes, state of emergencies changed nothing about the concealed carry laws or the carry firearm laws in general. So even if a hurricane was coming, the same rules applied. When you could carry, where you could carry, how you could carry. The same statutes applied. Nothing got suspended. Nothing got changed just because a hurricane was coming. Then Katrina happened, and if everybody remembers what happened with Katrina, basically the city of New Orleans was destroyed and was basically a hellscape, for lack of a better term, for quite a while after Katrina went through there. People didn't have power. People didn't have food. You had people hanging out in the streets, and you had people staying at the Thunderdome or the Superdome, and there were rapes and all these other kind of things. And so after that horrible situation happened with Katrina in New Orleans, the state of Florida decided, look, when there's a hurricane or an emergency, we probably should change or suspend or modify the concealed carry laws, because they didn't want somebody evacuating in a hurricane and having to leave all their firearms behind in an abandoned home, because if you have no power, if you have roaming people in the streets, if your house gets flooded or whatever, you have all these firearms in the home that are unsecured. That's number one. And number two, if you did have to evacuate and leave your house and go to a hotel room or go to a strange place or whatever, they didn't want people to be left without the ability to protect themselves while the hurricane was going on. So what the legislature in Florida did is they changed the law, and they basically added this subsection 3 here that I'm going to read. Okay, so the statute is 790.01. It's the standard unlicensed carrying concealed weapons or concealed firearms. This is the statute that makes it a crime for you to carry your firearm concealed if you don't have a permit, etc., etc. However, there's an exception in there, and you see it right here. It's in subsection 3A, okay? This is the exception when it comes to hurricanes. A person, or not just hurricanes, I'm using that as the obvious answer, but basically states of emergency. So this section does not apply to a person who carries a concealed weapon or a person who may lawfully possess a firearm and who carries a concealed firearm on or about his or her person while in the act of evacuating during a mandatory evacuation order issued during a state of emergency declared by the governor pursuant to Chapter 252 or declared by a local authority pursuant to Chapter 870. As used in this subsection, the term, quote, in the act of evacuating, unquote, means the immediate and urgent movement of a person away from the evacuation zone within 48 hours after a mandatory evacuation is ordered. The 48 hours may be extended by an order issued by the governor. So, what this means is if you are in an evacuation zone and you are mandatorily ordered to evacuate, not voluntarily, but if somebody, the governor or your local authority, mandatory evacuates your area and you have no choice but to leave your home and go somewhere else, this allows you to carry your firearms concealed and take them with you under your mandatory evacuation. You don't have to leave them in the home. As it clearly states in here, if you're evacuating for the 48 hours after the order has been given, you can go around with your firearm. Now, What it doesn't mean is that just because the governor issues a state of emergency means now all of a sudden you can carry concealed anywhere you want to go while the state of emergency is in effect. I get this question every year like clockwork when hurricanes come up. People always say, oh, well, the governor's issued an emergency declaration. That means I can conceal carry now, right? The answer to that is no. It's a very specific statute here as to who's exempt and who's not. So, again, I'll read it again. The term in the act of evacuating means the immediate and urgent movement of a person away from the evacuation zone within 48 hours after a mandatory evacuation is ordered. So if you are not in a mandatory evacuation area, this doesn't apply to you. So if they're mandatory evacuating the city of Tampa and you live in Orlando, it doesn't matter if there's a state of emergency in the state of Florida. You are not mandatory evacuating because you don't live in Tampa. If you live in Tampa and they're only mandatory evacuating barrier islands in St. Pete, you can't carry. If you don't live in those barrier islands that are mandatorily being evacuated, you can't evacuate. If you live in the city of Sarasota and they evacuate Siesta Key, that doesn't mean you can carry your firearm concealed because you live in the city of Sarasota, because you are not in the mandatory evacuation zone. Now, if you do live in an area and you're in your home, you don't have a concealed carry permit, and the governor or your local authority says you must evacuate your home, it means the immediate and urgent movement of a person away from the evacuation zone within 48 hours after a mandatory evacuation is ordered. That's it, period. If you are not that person, it doesn't count for you. If I don't live in an evacuation area, let's pick something easy. Let's say you live in the city of Sarasota and they're evacuating Lido Key. It's an island off Sarasota surrounded by water. Let's say they do a mandatory evacuation. If I live in the city of Sarasota and my house is not a mandatorily evacuated, I don't get the concealed carry. I also don't believe, in my opinion, it means that if you live in Sarasota and you go to Lido Key to help your buddy move, because like your buddy lives in Lido Key, and you drive there to help him move, you can't carry your firearm now illegally concealed if you don't have a permit to drive to Lido Key to help evacuate, because you are not in immediate and urgent movement away from evacuation zone within 48 hours after a mandatory evacuation is ordered, because you don't live in that mandatory evacuation area. So again, people don't understand this law, and they're going to get in trouble because they're not paying attention to what they're doing, and they're going to carry when they're not supposed to carry because they think there's a state of emergency or whatever, so that means that now they can conceal carry without their permit, and you cannot. And don't think that just because there's a hurricane that law enforcement officers, if they find you carrying when you're not supposed to, aren't going to arrest you just because they don't want to fill up the jail. The last hurricane we had down here, I had an individual who fell into this category. He did evacuate. He took his firearm with him legally, but he made the mistake of throwing the firearm in his bag, and then he went to the airport because he was evacuating the state of Florida to go to another state, and he forgot to take the firearm out of his bag, and so they arrested him. At the airport, they arrested him, and he spent the night with a hurricane sitting in the local county jail while the hurricane was going over his head, because they didn't just take his firearm and say, get on the flight and be safe and we'll give it to you when you get back. They arrested him at the airport for carrying concealed firearm, and he spent the night in jail during the hurricane. So they will still arrest you if you're violating the rules. And again, he was allowed to carry it to evacuate, but obviously he couldn't take it on the plane. So the rules don't apply everywhere that you go. And it's the same thing with where you end up evacuating. If you say, let's say you evacuate from your house and you go to an emergency shelter, and that shelter is a school, you're still not going to be able to carry your firearm, I don't believe, in my opinion, at that shelter. If somebody says differently, I haven't seen any case law or anything that exempts schools during this. It just allows you to leave your home and conceal carry your firearm. But if you end up going to a local school for a shelter, you're still on school property, you're not going to be able to bring that firearm with you. So you still need to follow the standard rules. The only thing that allows you to do is if you are in a spot that is mandatorily evacuated and the government is ordering you to leave your home, you are allowed to then take your firearms with you and carry them, including concealed, while you are immediately leaving the evacuation zone. It means immediate and urgent movement away from the zone. Now, once you leave that zone, and let's say you go stay at a hotel room in Orlando, guess what? You don't get to walk around the city of Orlando concealed carrying your firearm because you're saying, oh, I was mandatory evacuated, therefore I'm carrying it. No, it says the immediate and urgent movement away from the evacuation zone. Once you get to a safe place away from the evacuation zone, all bets are off and you're back to what the standard rules about concealed are. It's designed solely to allow people to take their firearms with them immediately. I can't repeat this enough. Immediate and urgent movement away from the evacuation zone. If you find yourself eventually away from the evacuation zone, you're back to your normal rules about that. So it's very important that people understand what the rules are in evacuation. Just because there's a hurricane doesn't mean that you're allowed to carry just wherever you want to, whenever you want to. You got to follow the rules of the statute and only carry it when you're immediate and urgent movement away from your mandatory evacuation zone. Once you get somewhere safe, all bets are off. And if you're not in a mandatory evacuation zone and you're not the one who's living there and then having to leave, you can't just drive into a zone and now all of a sudden act like I can carry a concealed firearm because I'm helping my buddy load up his stuff. So read the statute, follow the rules, be safe. Obviously, whenever there's a hurricane or any natural disaster coming, make sure that you're always safe. That's the number one priority, is keep yourself and your family safe. And if that includes having to evacuate with your firearms so you're not leaving them behind to be stolen, or you're not in danger because you're trying to evacuate from an area during a major crisis, please do so. So ending it here. If you have any questions, again, please comment down below. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. Click the bell. Ding, ding, ding. And I'll see you next time. Everybody be safe for this hurricane and all future hurricanes. And stay safe, stay healthy, stay vigilant, and as always, carry on.